world's most populous country is at a pivotal moment. For the first time in 6 decades, China's population is shrinking, with the national birth rate falling to a record low last year. Now, the death rate, on the other hand, is on the rise, and analysts have dubbed the recent decline a demographic crisis, saying it will act as a long-term drag on China's economy. Well, Stuart Gietel-Basten is a professor of social science at Khalifa University, and he joins us live now from Abu Dhabi. Now, Prof, a truly historic turning point for China. To what extent has the country's one-child policy and also the lower fertility rate contributed to this decline?
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, it really is a pivotal moment. And as you say, it is one which is 45 years in the making, right? Going back to even before the one-child policy, to the later, longer, fewer policies of the 70s, and through the one-child policy in the 80s and until today. So it's really no surprise that we've moved into this era of population decline, because we've had low fertility in China for such a long period of time. And when you have prolonged low fertility for a long period of time, as you rightly say, the number of births are going to decline, because you have fewer women of childbearing age coming through and having children. So even if women have the same number of children or even more children, because there's so much fewer women of reproductive age, then obviously the number of births is going to decline. So it's clearly a pivotal moment. Whether or not it's a crisis, I think, is a different question, right? I think that it's clearly a big psychological moment of saying this era of growth, the era of cheap labor, the era of relying upon very cheap labor for industrial development, that era is now pretty much come to a close, and there's a big full stop there. The next big full stop, of course, will be when India overtakes China. But whether it's a crisis or not depends more on how the government responds to it. It's not a crisis in and of itself.
Well, we'll get to India in just a little bit, but how do you think in general this will impact the people in China in the near future? You mentioned impacts on its workforce and labor. How about other aspects like housing, for example?
Yes, I think that psychologically it's a big issue. This it's a pivotal moment. How it's going to impact upon things like housing and the economy and education places and things like that in the very near future, there'll be no impact, right? Okay, it's not going to make any difference. What will be the greater issue is going to be how the government responds to this new demographic paradigm. And actually, I would argue, really more important than the overall population size is the population structure. Is about the relative number of older persons relative to middle-aged and to younger persons in the economy, and how all of those different age groups relate to each other, how productive they are, how healthy they are, how much tax they're paying, and so on. And of course, the government, this is no big surprise to the government. Maybe it's happened a little sooner than we might have expected because of COVID, which again, in many parts of the world, in common with China, pushed fertility rates to very low levels because of the economic uncertainty and jobs issues relating to COVID. So it's really going to be determined by how the government continues to work through the current 5-year plan and other programs in place to respond to this new demographic paradigm.
And let's talk a bit about those programs. As you mentioned, the aging population also poses a new set of challenges alongside this decline in population. What would some of these be when it comes to challenges? And also, what measures are currently being put in place to mitigate these impacts?
Yes, so with the aging population, you've kind of got to look at both sides of the coin, right? So yes, you're going to have many more older people. That's going to have an impact on the health system. It's going to have an impact upon social welfare and social security systems and pension systems. And therefore, that needs to be adapted, right? So retirement ages and pension ages in China are low. compared to international standards at the moment. So they will probably increase, and there are government plans in order to do that eventually. But then they have to be done in a fair and equitable way. Similarly with healthy aging and active aging for the older population, to keep the older population as healthy and as active as possible. And big programs on poverty reduction, big programs on health development, on social welfare and social work. These are all big changes which have been brought in. Then on the other hand, you think, well, you've got a smaller, younger population. So how can you ensure that that smaller workforce is as productive and is realizing their full potential? And of course, at the moment, you've got a 17-18% youth unemployment rate in China. And so, again, at the moment, I'm sure there'll be other people today saying, well, just have more babies. That's not the solution to this. It's not the solution to anything, right? China's got to be able to do more with the younger population that it has to enable them to release their full potential to try and balance this new demographic system.
Right. And, we want to pivot away from the domestic situation into a more global stage. The UN says that China will lose the title of the world's most populous nation to India this year. And with India's population also growing very rapidly, how will China's population decline affect its competitiveness on a global scale, economically and otherwise?
So again, I think it's that when India overtakes China, and it may already have done, it may be doing it right now. We simply don't know, but it's going to be around now. Psychologically, that will be a big issue again, right? Geopolitically, okay, maybe it's kind of, China loses the bragging rights to be the most populous country on earth. But in terms of economic growth, this is much more than population size and even population structure. If we're thinking about how you can translate a younger growing population into economic growth, it's not automatic. It has to come through the development of decent jobs, of decent employment, of education that links through to the needs of the labour market, about infrastructure, about language, about regional integration, about how different ethnic groups subsist and get on with each other, right? It's about female rights and gender and female empowerment and gender equality. Now, if you put all of those things together, then obviously, India is behind on China on a number of those different metrics, even though just looking at a spreadsheet, the population in terms of population growth and population structure might look slightly favorable. So it's not over for China by any means, I would say.
Professor, thank you so much for your insights. That was Stuart Gietel-Basten from Khalifa University.